Hello and welcome to the English edition of the Scan Daily News. My name is Garis Duma. The top leaders of the state were present today in Vlora, the same place where 101 years ago Ismail Qemali hoisted the national flag and declared the independence of Albania. A variety of activities were held to mark this holy day. Vlora hotly celebrated the 101st anniversary of independence of Albania. The Day of the Flag has gathered top state leaders to celebrate this important day in the place where the national flag was raised on November 28 in 1912 by Ismail Qemali. The President Bujar Nishani, the Prime Minister Edi Rama, and Assembly Speaker Ilir Meta joined thousands of citizens of Vlora and Albania throughout the diaspora who were in town to celebrate. The leaders of the most important institutions in the country were together in a flag-raising ceremony where they placed floral wreaths at the tomb of Ismail Qemali. Flag Day activities were held throughout the country. However, as is tradition, Independence Day was celebrated in Kosovo, Macedonia, and other countries where Albanians live as well. The Albanian government opened an international competition to build the promenade of Vlora, which will start from Forest Soda and end at the Coldwater Tunnel. Completion of the project will improve the tourism of the area. The Albanian government has opened an international competition to build the promenade in the city of Vlora. The construction of the promenade that stretches along the coastline in a symbolic way happened after the flag-raising ceremony at the city commemorating the country's independence 101 years ago. After presenting the project developed in 2012, the Prime Minister claimed that this was one of the most important investment projects of the first year of the government. The project, named Lungomare, envisages the construction of a promenade along the seacoast from Soda Forest to Coldwater Tunnel. Along the coastline, about 20,000 square meters of creative projects are expected to commence, with playgrounds, sports fields, public restrooms, and more. Also, open garden areas will be 8,000 square meters, and the area will be paved with marble tiles. The completion of works for this project is expected to have significant impact on tourism for Vlora. Preparing the ground for the construction of the promenade is associated with the collapse of several buildings constructed along the coastline. The government has decided to suspend the process of leasing the unused agricultural land. The decision comes at a time when the executive is working on a new program for agriculture, and the new territorial reform is expected to have the effect of merging a number of municipalities. The local governments will not be able to divide agricultural land. The Council of Ministers has temporarily suspended leases in July of last year, where all municipalities or municipalities that have territorial-dependent agricultural lands had to undergo a verification process on utilized lands in order to give them rent. Under the protocol, the local units can yield farmland rent for periods of 10 to 99 years, depending on the investment project. In justification, the Council of Ministers said that the suspension of the implementation of this directive is considered a temporary measure until the implementation of the legislative changes, so that procedures for leasing these lands are better controlled. This means that the executive will draft a new legislation and procedures for this development of this process in the future. The decision to suspend this process comes at a time when work has begun to implement new territorial reform and when a large number of municipalities are expected to melt. During October, for the first time since the beginning of this year, the fiscal administration has managed to reach their income goals. The Normative Act has assistance in this regard as it significantly lowered revenue expectancies. During October, for the first time since the beginning of this year, the fiscal administration has managed to reach their income goals. The unstoppable spiral of negative contraction was based on the consumption tax, value-added tax, which continued for 9 consecutive months, was stopped during October, where it managed to gather around 10.8 billion lek, or 418 million lek more than was planned. According to figures from the Ministry of Finance, in 10 months of this year, revenues from VATs are at the place of 89.7 billion lek from the 89.3 billion lek that was planned. Based on data of recent months, the Bank of Albania has confirmed a continuation of modest growth of the Albanian economy at a time when private consumption and investments remain dormant. However, according to the Ministry of Finance, figures show that the growth during this period, revenues from excise tax cashed at 29.5 billion lek, while the planned amount was 28.4 billion lek. Revenues from the income tax amounted to 12.5 billion lek from the 12.6 billion lek that was planned. In October, the fiscal administration failed to change the course of the negative income in the budget, but the figures translate into 2.4 billion lek more than planned. So for 10 months, revenue from taxes and customs reached a value of 265.8 billion lek from the 263.4 billion lek previously planned. The establishment of a relationship of mutual understanding between the administration and the business community has increased fiscal revenues to the state budget. Commenting on the official statistics for October, the economic expert Agim Binay says that not only did the performance of the fiscal administration change, but also the understanding of entrepreneurship has contributed to the revenue growth. The establishment of a relationship of mutual understanding between the administration and the business community has increased fiscal revenues to the state budget. Commenting on the fiscal statistics for October, the economic expert Agim Binay says that not only did the performance of the fiscal administration change, but also the understanding of entrepreneurship has contributed to the revenue growth. According to him, consumption has increased compared to the same period a year ago, as well as the level of imports. According to Binay, in order to increase the revenues of the state budget, all levels of central and local institutions must cooperate and work together. Referring to the 10-month fiscal data, income from tax administration only during the month of October was 2.4 billion lek more than was planned. In the third quarter of this year, unemployment in the economy stood still at 12.8%. Although economic growth rates have come down to the limit of 1%, according to Instat, growth was recorded in the number of employees in the private sector. Although the Albanian economy in the last 2 years is growing at about a quarter of its potential, the unemployment rate is not rising. The unemployment rate in Albania has not changed for the 5th consecutive quarter. According to Instat, in the third quarter of the year, the economy stayed unemployed at 12.8%. Although economic growth rates have not come down to the limit of 1%, statistics do not highlight rising unemployment. Rather, in the third quarter, according to Instat, there was an increase in the number of employees in the private sector. Instat reports that the number of employees in the private non-agricultural sector grew by 2.3% compared with the previous quarter and 5.8% compared with the same period a year ago. Regarding the public sector and agriculture, the figures had no updates compared to the previous quarter. In a theoretical perspective, the unemployment curve in the economy represents a kind of paradox. Although the Albanian economy in the last 2 years is growing at about a fourth of its potential, the unemployment rate does not rise. Rather, unemployment today is about 1 percentage point lower than in 2010, when economic growth was about 3 times higher. Furthermore, according to Instat, employment growth is accompanied by rising wages, which last year grew by 7.3% on an annual basis. Private pension funds continued their growth during the third quarter of the year. Total fund assets amounted to approximately 400 million lek, with an increase of 41% since the end of 2012. Despite the efforts of financial institutions to develop this market, the above figures clearly show that private pensions continue to have very modest proportions. Private pension funds continued their growth during the third quarter of the year. Total fund assets amounted to approximately 400 million lek, with an increase from 41% since the end of 2012. Assets of private pension funds consist mainly of investments in bonds and the Albanian government's unpaid obligations. The rise of funds is completed in parallel with the growth of members. In late September, the contributors to the private pension fund were more than 7,850, with an increase of nearly 8% since the end of last year. The market operates with 3 private pension funds, controlled by 3 financial institutions with experience in banking and insurance activities. Despite the efforts of financial institutions to develop the market, the above figures clearly show that private pensions continue to have very modest proportions. The only hope to give these institutions reform is through the pension reform and the involvement in the scheme as a mandatory objective. The comprehensive reform of the pension program still remains pending and is not yet defined by a clear goal from the most recent parliamentary elections. The only changes that have been on the table for discussion with the International Monetary Fund and World Bank is the increase of the retirement age for women and increase the amount of Social Security contributions. Thank you for following our English edition. My name is Garis Duma.